with those.
Thanks, thanks. So, thanks. Great introduction. That's the new direction that our journeys are going to take us. For those of you who enjoyed the Mother's House presentation, the book is finally out. So, you guys were a big help in helping me, kind of crystallize the material. So, please get the book In the Mother's House. I forgot the subtitle. The Hebrew Bible's Lost Teachings on Love, Wisdom, and Sacred Marriage. So it's available anywhere that they sell books. So you're most welcome to get the whole compilation of the teachings we have been doing for the past couple years. Okay, so today, so yes, so it's I'm switching gear into masculinity, right? We spoke about femininity, about what it means to be a woman's power in the last few couple years, and now I'm switching to what it means to be a man. So you might be surprised that it is a woman who is teaching on this topic. Um, I don't choose what ideas come to me. So I have been the recipient of this series. So it's me, guys. It's nothing new. I mean, men have been talking about women forever. So for once, we will flip it and have a woman talk about masculinity. Um, okay, so um, the contrast I'm going to be making is not so much between biblical masculinity and our culture masculinity, but I will be contrasting it with the Greco-Roman, with the concept of masculinity, which is at play right now in our culture, right? So, but the roots of the type of masculinity that is being taught, especially on social media in our culture, the roots are in the Greco-Roman era. So I want to contrast two types of heroes' journeys in this whole series. The Greek hero's journey, as exemplified in the Odyssey, and the biblical hero's journey, as exemplified in the book of Genesis. I think these are two uh, texts that we can hold in parallel. So, just to give you a quick overview of the Greek concept of masculinity that is, of course, at play in our culture, you have, if you don't know the Odyssey, I had to read it in order to teach this class. So, I read the Odyssey, it was great. Um, I invite you to read it so you can see the contrast more vividly. You have a young man who just got married, who embarks in a war. And then after the war, he tries to find his way back home, but can't. There's all kinds of obstacles. He gets, stranded on islands. He meets all kinds of weird mythical creatures, and he has to cunningly make his way, sometimes violently, out of these different challenges. Eventually, he gets home to find it filled with potential suitors for his wife. He has to basically wage war against them. He destroys every single one of them. There's a whole lot of bloodshed at the end of the story, and then eventually he captures his wife back and his young son. So that's the story of the Greek hero, right? So the initiation here has to do with there's two things going on in the Greek concept of the hero that is radically different from the Hebrew concept. In the Greek concept, you first have to separate from the woman. You have to move away from your wife, from your mother, from your family. You have to, it's an act of separation. And then you have to, of course, conquer a number of challenges, often cunningly or violently, but definitely there is the idea of the hero becoming more and more masterful, more and more powerful. And that's how the initiation happens, right? Now, what's interesting is that in the biblical initiation that we're going to see in all seven of the stories that I'm about to tell you in the months to come, we have the opposite. The initiation takes place through relationship. There's always the man cannot become a man until he has learned to connect, not only to God, but to his intimate partner, very often to the woman. So it's the opposite movement, right? It's not separation, it's connection that makes a man a man. And then, of course, instead of the man becoming a man through conquest and violence, he becomes a man through being himself overcome, wounded, broken. And after this moment of complete dissolution coming undone, he emerges as a real man. Very different type of man though than the Greek one, right? In the Hebrew concept, the man that emerges is a man out of this, the relationality and out of the woundedness is a man that in fact is going to be deeply connected to his humanity, It's not the superhero concept that we have in our culture, right? For us, the ultimate man is Batman, right? That's how we see, right? The ideals of manhood is the rah, the man who has conquered all his foes and who is, alone, who doesn't need anybody, right? So here we have a very different manhood, which is connected to his humanity, to his brokenness, and connected to others, right? This is the ideal, which was not just biblical, but in the ancient Near Eastern context of the Bible, you have this ideal of manhood actually playing out, and the title that is given such a man is the title of shepherd king. So the image of the shepherd, which we find throughout the Bible, ancient and New Testament, is actually an ancient Near Eastern concept. And the ancient Near East would contrast the shepherd king with the farmer king, right? And you have this playing out subtly in the story of Cain and Abel. We'll come back to this concept, therefore, right? So the shepherd king is the man who is not, the farmer king who has conquered, and we'll see more of that later. The shepherd king is a man who is entirely turned towards responsibility, caring, right? But to become the shepherd king, to be such a man who is whose manhood is defined as responsibility for the other or care for the other, you have to go through that initiation journey of brokenness and connection, right? So that's what the journey. This is in essence the main contrast that we will find between the Greek and the Hebrew hero. And we will look at how this plays out in 7 biblical characters: Adam, Cain, Noah, Shem, Abraham, Jacob, and Levi. So this is our itinerary. Today, we start with Adam. Adam is the blueprint of manhood. Not the perfect Adam, by the way. The other one, the one that emerges out of the fall, is actually the blueprint of manhood. We tend to think, this is the mistake we often make when we read the Bible, especially these early stories of Adam and Eve. We tend to think that God created man and woman perfect. And while he created them innocent, right, they didn't sin yet, he did not create them mature, right? When we read the story, you can see how uh, immature they are, how in a way self-absorbed they still are in the beginning, in the early moments of their creation. And then it's through the trial of the eating the fruit and going through the nakedness and the pain and the whole undoing that this ordeal does for them. Then they emerge, both Adam and Eve, right? But in our context, Adam, as the ideal of manhood. So I want to take you through that journey for Adam. I want to start, number one, with man in the garden. So man as the shepherd king, we'll talk about this. Then we'll look at the breaking of the throne. That's number 2. This is when man loses his power. And then we will look at the restoration. So that's the very quickly. I mean, we could do this in 3 stages, but I want to just breeze through these 3 moments of the male journey here in the story of Adam. So I want to start with the enthronement of Adam. We often don't realize what is happening in this story. And you have to connect our story with the ancient Near Eastern stories to be able to see what is actually happening. This is not God just creating a man, putting him in a garden so he can have fun, right? This is not about Adam wandering around like a poet, looking at the trees. This is not what is happening here, right? In the ancient Near East, you had this very typical image of a man in a garden. This often represented, or almost always represented, the enthronement of a king and the responsibility given to a king to take care. So the garden represented cosmic order. It was the garden of the gods. And so the king is often represented as a gardener in ancient Near Eastern stories. He's a gardener who is in charge of the garden of the gods. And as he tends to this garden, he in a way tends to cosmic order. And that is how the king preserves his kingdom, right? So the ancient Near Eastern saw the king as a gardener who was meant to protect the garden. And that is how, of course, his kingdom was, it was a symbol for him caring for the divine order of things, right? So when you know this, when you have this in the back of your mind and you look at the story, our story, the creation story, where you have a man in a garden, this should be seen as enthronement of a man in our context, the human couple, right? This is one of the differences between the ancient Near East and our story. In the ancient Near East, the king is male and there is only the king. In our story, it is the human couple which is enthroned as as a royal couple. They're given in Genesis 1, both of them are given the title of rulers, right? In the Hebrew, Chada means to rule. They're both given the task to rule over the fish of the sea and the beasts on the land, and then, of course, to multiply. So this is the Genesis 1. So the man is not ruling alone, right? That's the template, right? In terms of very different in a way. But we have still this notion of the man in the garden, and it's interesting because the man is given, so now we move to Genesis 2. Before the woman has yet arrived on the scene, he's given the command to, and the Hebrew there is interesting. We usually talk about in terms of tilling and keeping the soil, and it looks like, God is teaching him to hoe, or, I don't know, right? It's not the Hebrew words are very different than just, how to till the land. Hebrew word is avad and shamar. Avad means to work, but it also means to worship, and it also means to serve, right? So there's a very different connotation than the man being the master of the land. The man is actually the servant of the land, right? This is much closer to how the ancient cultures saw themselves in connection to the earth. We see ourselves as conquerors, as dominators, people who can just take whatever we want. You had, I think, what's her name again? This woman, Marjorie Taylor Greene. She was talking about how we have the power, biblical power given to us to take whatever we want from the earth. So it doesn't, so we need not, think about, saving the earth and so forth, because and she quotes the Bible, she quotes this text. It's a common misunderstanding, she's not the only one, saying, well, God made us masters of the earth, so we can take whatever resources we want from it. There's no limit to what we can take. This is not the actual Hebrew. The actual Hebrew is avad, means you serve, you are the servant of the earth, right? And then shamar is to protect. So the role of the man is also to protect. So this is not just about the earth. If God is enthroning the man as king as a royal of the universe, he's telling him this is how you are to rule your kingdom. You are to rule not as a conqueror or a master, but as a servant and as a protector. Right. And if you're familiar, of course, are familiar with the New Testament. This is exactly how Jesus defined what it means to rule. Anyone who wants to be first needs to be last. Anyone who wants to be a master over his brothers needs to become their servant. So we have already here in this ancient story, this paradigm. The man is supposed to serve and to protect. These are the actual translations of Avad and Shamar. So it's interesting that the text, right after this command is given to serve and protect the earth, God makes a specification. And it seems disconnected, but it is in fact deeply connected. He tells the man, this tree, you can eat of all the trees, but this tree you cannot eat. There's actually a connection between how the man is supposed to rule and this limitation set on his powers. In other words, the man is given the power to rule, he's given power, and at the same time, God is limiting his powers, telling the man, this is how you ought to rule. You ought not to rule with the expansion of your power limitlessly. You ought to rule through the limitation of your own powers. As you learn to limit your power of greed, of lust, of will to power, you are going to be a masterful ruler. You will have genuine authority through the limitation of your power. So that is how these two verses are connected. And in fact, in the ancient Near East, this idea, you find it again. The king is supposed to rule not through the expansion of his powers, but through the respect of cosmic law. The king is the one who not only is supposed to respect cosmic law, but he's supposed to uphold it. You have this in Sumer, you have this in Egypt. In Egypt, there is some vivid iconography about this, where you have the king offering up the goddess Ma'at to the gods. And Ma'at, of course, this goddess signifies cosmic order. And so the king, in a way, remains king in Egypt through this constant offering up of the cosmic order to the gods. That is the essence of his offering. So that's so we see some connections here, right? The man ought to rule through limitation. And when the man loses this capacity to limit himself, this is when the kingdom is in danger. Not from outside invaders. The early biblical texts are not worried about outside invaders, right? This is not an issue. The worry is whether the cosmic law will be maintained. It is to the degree that the law is maintained that the empire is protected. So there's no need here to erect walls and to have a strong immigration policy, right? The enemy is not outside, the enemy is within. To the degree that we lose the respect of the law within, we become vulnerable without, right? So very different here from the Greco-Roman ideal, right? The king in the context of Rome and Greece. Of course, there's strong laws, but at the same time, there's this limitless urge to conquer, right? There's the limitless urge to expand. And one could argue that this will to power that is uncurbed and which eventually, poisons the inner politics of Rome is what created the dissolution of Rome. The dissolution of Rome was not that the walls were all of a sudden weak. The dissolution of Rome came because little by little cosmic law was not respected by the emperor because the emperor wanted to have limitless powers, right? So very opposite ideal, right, with the Greco-Roman context. Okay, so knowing this now about the man, that he was meant to protect cosmic order through self-limitation, we can now finally better understand what actually happened when he took the fruit, right? So I'm moving now to the second part, which I have entitled The Breaking of the Throne. This is man losing his throne. And I want to spend a little time on this moment of man becoming undone because I believe this is where he will emerge. This is the moment of his emergence as a true man, right? Before this, by the way, the man is a little bit autistic. In other words, a little bit self-absorbed. You see that when the woman is created, and he looks at her, and of course, he's wow, right? He's amazed. But notice what he says. I mean, it's a beautiful moment of poetry. We have to give him that. He's the man in the story is very loving, but at the same time, he says, "Bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called Isha because from Ish she was taken. She will be called woman because from man she was taken." So there's a kind of narcissistic connection here with the woman. The woman is wonderful in as much as she reflects me, in as much as she reflects how amazing I am, right? So you can see how the man, even though he is a very loving man, he has strong emotional intelligence. At the same time, there's a narcissism there in the early in man in the early stages, and we will see how this begins to shift through the ordeal of the what we call the fall. So it's interesting when the woman, the story, she's tempted, she eats the fruit, gives it to the man, he eats the fruit. What does all of this mean, right? So what's interesting is that when you read tradition, so Christian and Jewish tradition, the rabbis and the ancient fathers, church fathers on this passage, when you read some of their commentaries, all of them, it's unbelievable, all of them unanimously, Jewish and Christian, blame the woman, right? They say the woman ate the fruit, the woman brought death into the world. And it's interesting because our text is not saying that, right? In fact, our text blames the man for what happened. When God finally gets to the man, he talks to the serpent, to the woman, and to the man. He says, "Cursed is the earth because of you." In other words, it was the man's responsibility to protect his kingdom, to protect the earth through the observance of cosmic law, right? The command not to eat the fruit. And so because the man ate the fruit, the responsibility, and because he was the one in charge of cosmic order, the responsibility falls on him, right? So the eating of the fruit is not, he ate a fruit or he disobeyed God, right? What is happening here is a shift of allegiance. And this is the problem. When the woman gives the fruit to the man, and we talked about this when we did Eve, right? She is in a way embodying God because God is the one who gives food. She is in a way saying, I am now your provider and your sustainer. I am taking the position of a goddess when she does that. It's a very powerful move. When man takes the fruit and receives from her, he's basically saying, you are now the center of my life and not God. He's shifting his allegiance from God to woman, from the absolute to the relative, from the eternal to the temporal. Right? Kierkegaard talks about this, about how we can love all things, but we have to be careful to give the absolute its proper place and the relative its proper place. We cannot make the relative the absolute. We cannot make the creatures the creator, right? And so that is what is actually happening. And in breaking the law, which is what Adam is doing, this is when death begins to seep into the world, right? What preserves the garden from chaos, from the tohu vabohu that God has pushed out, is precisely the observance of cosmic law. The moment Adam takes the fruit is the breaking of cosmic law, and then the insertion of chaos, right? Chaos begins to infiltrate the garden. So the blame in our text is put on the man, right? Now, um, let's look a little bit at, and of course, I haven't talked at all about the woman's role here because I did that in the other lecture on Eve, and I don't want to go back into that, but you can watch it on my YouTube channel if you want, it's there. So, if you want to get a little more insights on the woman. But let's go now to the divine judgment. So, God arrives on the scene, and always love this moment. I cannot stop talking about it. It's God arrives on the scene, and the Hebrew word that is used is not, it's the word that would be best translated as he's strolling in the evening air, right? So God is walking, but he's not just walking. There's the word that has the implication of he's leisurely strolling. So I love this, how God already knows what happened, but he's absolutely not phased. Right? He arrives and he's totally relaxed. It's like all is good. I got this. Right. So I love the way that God is not uh, upset by our failings, right? God is not, he doesn't bat an eye, right? It's just like, okay, you did this, all right, plan B or plan A1, I don't know, right? He's absolutely, God is not upset or, challenged by our mistakes and our transgressions, right? He is leisurely strolling in the garden. And of course, he asked the question, what have you done? Did you eat the fruit? Blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, you have the judgment over the man, which we talked about. And then I want to zoom in, of course, on Genesis 3:16 with the famous expression to the woman and to the man, right? Which is addressed to the woman, but has to do with the man. Your desire for the man, and he will rule over you. Right, this is such a dense passage, which I have found to be so rich that I edited a special issue just on this verse. So if you're interested, just look it up. It's called The Woman's Curse. And then you have a bunch of articles also from some of our scholars, Arlen Drew, Mathilde Frey, Dick Davidson, my dad, Jacques Ducamp. So you have a bunch of, we got together with other Old Testament scholars and really looked at this passage. And so I'm going to give you a tiny little crumb of what we talked about. It is my position that in this passage, her desire for the man and man will rule over her. It is my understanding that the word rule here, mashal, doesn't have to do with him losing his authority over the woman, which is what a lot of tradition talks about, right? A lot of Christian tradition, church fathers say, see, the man lost his grip on the woman. So now God is giving back his power. But the word mashal is much broader than just over a single individual. Word mashal has to do with cosmic rule. You see this already in Genesis 1 when God sets the sun and tells the sun, you will rule over the earth, over the day. Right? And in fact, this idea of the sun ruling over this vast domain is taken again in Egypt, where the Pharaoh's rule is compared to the sun. The Pharaoh rules like the sun because his empire is as great as the sun's empire, right? So, Mashal, you can see from Genesis 1, has to do with cosmic rule, not controlling a single individual, right? So when God is giving back the mashal to man, he's not giving back his authority over the woman. In fact, he never had. He was never meant to have authority over the woman. They were created equal, and both were meant to rule over the earth, right? So what he's actually giving him back, I believe, here in this passage, is his cosmic rule that he lost by eating the fruit. Now, what's interesting is that in this passage, it's not God who is giving it back to him. The text says to the woman, your desire for your husband, and and he will rule over you, right? So in other words, there's a connection between the woman's love towards her husband and his ability to gain back his authority and his ability to rule cosmically. And so there's a reciprocity here between the woman's love and her loving intention towards the man and his regaining back his authority. And just a couple words on the preposition rule over, right? I have shown in the context of that special issue that over can also be translated as through, right? The preposition Hebrew bar, which we translate over, to rule over you, can also be translated to rule through you. And so we can read the passage anew as the woman say, the woman desires for the man and the man will rule through her, right? In other words, he regains his power through the love of a woman. This is actually very biblical. This is not some random idea. The in the biblical text, and this is another distinction with the Greco-Roman world. In the biblical text, man individuates or people individuate through other people. You become a man, you become a woman through the connection to the opposite sex, right? And we'll see this happens to the woman too. But here we have the woman, through her love, is giving back man his lost throne and his broken crown, so to say. Through the love of a woman, the man becomes empowered here, or re-empowered. And there's so much to be said about that, about how a woman can empower a man, right? And too often we are taught in our society, you become a man by yourself. You make money, you buy a house, you have an account, right? We have forgotten that true manhood emerges out of the intimate connection with woman. It is through the love of a woman often that, or I believe always, that a man truly becomes a man. Right. So we have this idea of the relationality of individuation. You individuate in relation against the Greco-Roman ideal where you individuate through separation, right? When the Greek hero leaves behind his wife and son, right? That's when he becomes a man in the Greco-Roman ideal. And in our civilization also. In the Hebraic concept, it's as the man reconnects to the woman intimately, as they are reconciled. This is when the man emerges in his true manhood, right? As shepherd king. And you can see this emergence in what he does next. And this for me is the climax of the story. This tells me what an amazing man this man has always been, right? Adam. He at that moment when he has regained his power, he turns to his wife, who is probably feeling like she is the cause of everything, right? Eve, at that moment, when death comes into the world, realizes what she has done. And she realizes, I have opened the gates to death. But Adam is going to overturn that. He turns to her, overturns her destiny, and tells her, you might think you are the one who ushers in death, but from now on, you are the mother of life. That is what a shepherd king does. Shepherd king is able to see beyond the appearances and to bring it forth. That's a shepherd king. There's such a powerful moment here of redemption, right? And this is redemption on the part of the man towards the woman. He turns to her and says, you thought you were this, but now you will be this. He prophetically overturns her destiny. That is the ultimate shepherd king. And it's only the man now who is capable of doing that. The man in the beginning was telling her, bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. You are my reflection. Now he's able to truly see her in her unique destiny. And not only is he able to truly see her through this moment of, because he has been so broken and so churned by what has happened, he's able to call it forth. The true manhood, right? What makes a man, what makes a man a true shepherd king, is the ability not to see the woman or the world as a reflection of his power or he is his ability to see everything around him in its own light. And not only to see what everything could become, but to bring it forth. That is the ultimate shepherd king. The shepherd king is the one who sees beyond appearances to the true self of the people around him and calls it forth in everything and around him and everyone around him. The shepherd king is the one that facilitates growth, maturation, individuation of everyone around him. He's in that sense the master gardener, right? Who tends to his plants, who knows what each plant needs, and who makes it his calling to nurture the growth and the maturation and the life within all things. That is the blueprint of manhood that we see here in the biblical text. Okay, that is in very fast speedboat version, the portrait of a man in the story of Adam. And now, if you wish, we can open it up to discussion. Um,
There
and I
we
will
go.
stop the
Oh,
recording here.
thank you, Abby.